They want you to believe the AI revolution is already here. Jobs are disappearing, productivity is exploding, and if you're not building an AI startup or spending every waking hour learning how to 10x your productivity, you're apparently already falling behind. But when you actually look at the data, something much stranger appears. Right now, 7 companies account for roughly a third of the S&P 500, which means the AI economy might not be an economy at all. It might just be a very expensive group chat between 7 CEOs all quietly terrified of a 3 a.m. Truth Social post. And if you're worried that AI is about to take over the job market, you need to understand something very important. The difference between what's actually happening and the story big tech wants you to believe. So the Magnificent 7 companies now account for 34% of the S&P 500 overall. But there's a quiet damage happening. People think they've missed the AI wave, or that growth should be faster than it is. But is that the reality?
Let's look at what's really happening. Let's look at the S&P 500. Many say this demonstrates how well the world economy is doing. It is based on 500 American companies. And if you possess a basic understanding of a map, you might argue that America and the world are not in fact the same thing. But don't tell the economists that. Many of these companies make money globally, so it's arguably a good measure of how the global economy is doing, even though it's priced by US investors responding to US narratives.
Or as Donald J. Trump puts it, for too long, the United States has allowed other countries to have money. It was a bad deal, a disaster. Starting today, if you want to buy a loaf of bread in Paris or a car in the United Kingdom, you won't use euros or pounds. You'll use fractional shares of Nvidia or Meta. If it's not in the S&P, it's not real wealth.
Well, he didn't actually say that. Not yet anyway. But you thought it was true, didn't you? Anyways, the S&P 500 is based on expectations, not real revenue.
As you can see, there was a big dip in 2008 during the financial crisis, obviously caused by Obama. And in 2022, after the pandemic, obviously caused by Sleepy Joe.
In 23 and 24, it looked like the economy had recovered, but that was market expectations, not reality.
In 25, S&P growth slowed down due to policy volatility and mixed confidence in tech.
That's just a boring way of saying every CEO in America was terrified to check their Truth Social notification at 3 a.m., fearing a new post might accidentally slap them with a 400% regulatory tax if their AI didn't start wearing a red MAGA hat and praising Doge.
In reality, investor focus shifted from uncontrollable enthusiasm to evaluating whether heavy AI investment would translate into sustained growth, causing tech stocks to just swing more. But companies like the Mag 7 make up a huge share of the S&P index.
In 25, the rest of the S&P 500 grew more than the Magnificent 7, but you wouldn't know it from the headlines, because AI dominates the narrative. The real story is, in a decade, the Mag 7's share of the S&P jumped from 12% to 34%. 7 companies now shape a third of how investors see the entire US and even global economy.
That's not diversification, that's a group chat. Yet, the real shock isn't that we're dependent on 7 companies. It's that we're dependent on Musk and Zuckerberg staying on the right side of a 3 a.m. Truth Social retruth.
We have handed the keys of the world economy to a handful of firms that spend more time pitching AI-powered patriotism than actually making things that work. When they surge, the index looks healthy. When you remove them, the remaining 493 companies tell a very different story.
The S&P isn't showing a booming economy, it's showing optimism about a few AI-linked giants. So, we're not dependent on them to keep the economy alive, but to keep the narrative alive. And that's what's driving the headlines. And that narrative has to keep working to make the market and the tech giants look healthy for investors. Whilst these might be US companies, unfortunately, they also have a disproportionate impact on the global economy.
Because we use the US dollar for global trade and store our national savings in US debt. We have tied our financial seatbelts to the American economy. If the US economy stumbles, our savings lose value and our trade slows down, meaning we are effectively forced to support their stability to ensure our own.
Now compare that with the Fortune 500, which is based on actual revenue, not share price. The Fortune 500 ranks the biggest US companies. In total, Fortune 500 companies account for 2/3 of US GDP. While the 10% revenue jump in 25 looks like a massive win, it's more of a steady climb than a miracle.
These figures represent nominal growth, which doesn't account for the 2.7% inflation rate or the higher prices companies charge to keep their profits steady. Since more than half of that growth comes from raising prices rather than selling more products, the actual progress is incremental rather than transformational.
What you don't see is AI suddenly doubling revenues, or explosive new business models, or step change in productivity gains, or showing up in top line sales. If AI was already transforming the economy at scale, you'd expect to see things like new entrants rapidly climbing the list, or existing firms showing sudden revenue acceleration, not just margin expansion.
An AI survey by McKinsey found that the majority of companies are still in the early stage of AI deployment and have not yet seen significant revenue impact. In plain English, this means every CEO in America is currently paying Sam Altman a subscription fee just to have an AI write emails that nobody reads.
They haven't gained any scaled revenue impact, which is McKinsey babble for we're burning piles of cash and getting nothing back. We're all deploying it because we're terrified of being the only person at the dinner party without an AI global strategy.
We're essentially just bankrolling Altman's Labubu collection, while our actual business is still running on Excel and hope. The reality is, only a small share of companies have reached a stage where AI is deeply integrated enough to materially affect top-line results.
So far, AI has mostly shown productivity and cost efficiency gains, rather than dramatic top-line acceleration. In other words, revenue growth looks flat to modest. So AI appears more as a cost-saving tool rather than a growth engine.
That's the uncomfortable bit. If AI were genuinely transforming businesses at scale, you will see it here first, in revenue. You don't. Historically, real economic transformations show up in top-line revenue.
For example, the change that happened after smartphones arrived. Before smartphones, you only used the internet when you were sitting at a desk. Then the iPhone came along and suddenly the internet lived in your pocket. That one change meant you could order a taxi while standing in the rain, pay for things on the train, check your bank balance in a queue, or order food without even thinking about it.
Services stopped being something you planned and became something you did, instinctively, all day long. That's why companies like Uber, Deliveroo, and mobile banking apps exploded. Not because they were clever ideas, but because mobile made people use services far more often.
Which drove real increases in consumption, not just nice looking apps. But we are not yet seeing this type of impact from AI.
This is the core insight, and it's brutal. Investors' expectation is that AI companies will scale to billions. AI is not changing things yet. We're not seeing increased corporate revenue among companies outside big tech giants, nor are we seeing broad productivity gains or wage growth. Real economic output across most sectors.
So expectation and reality are two very different things, and that is where the hype lives. And historically, gaps like this resolve in one of two ways. Reality catches up, often slowly, painfully, or expectations come down, often quickly and violently. Yet, neither option looks like the overnight AI revolution being sold.